his interior monologue, and then he'll give voice to those musings right here on this stage. Or maybe tomorrow, a future international diplomat in the middle school who will have researched the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and its roots in France's droits de l'homme, will have delved into the stories of people on the move across the world and how immigration impacts our global relationships. In the FabLab, she'll use 3D technology to design and build monuments to those whose voices would have been silenced in history had she not heard their call from the past. But regardless of what the many tomorrows of our students will bring, Marymount Paris remains unequivocally committed to ensuring that they exercise good judgment and they make sense of the world around them and they collaborate to solve difficult problems, to live a life of meaning and a life of joy. When our Board of Trustees deliberated on the appropriate project in commemoration with our centenary year, it is the most significant capital project we've undertaken since the RSHM Sports Center. Time was spent in reflection on this auspicious occasion. We are the first international school in the global network of RSHM schools to reach the 100-year milestone. Our community spans 4 continents and educates nearly 19,000 young people, and we're delighted to share this anniversary year with Marymount Los Angeles. We do owe a true debt of gratitude to our trustees and their discernment that led our school to a deeper understanding that to keep doing what we do best, better than the rest, we must optimize flexible, purposefully designed, student-centered learning spaces. Because our students today will be called upon tomorrow to fuel innovation in technology, to harness their creativity in the challenging world problems in our complex world, to drive greater diversity and inclusion in the world around us. And the library has always been an essential place of gathering and hospitality in our community. And the FabLab was the first of its kind in an international school in France. But the barriers that previously were imposed on physical classrooms have been erased in the past few years. And maybe this disruption helped us recalibrate and to remember that young people are enthralled by complexity and they crave creative challenges that reflect their real world. And it's our task to then nurture that ability so that they cultivate their own voices earlier than ever before to formulate critical thinking and then ethical leadership. And actually, learning at Marymount Paris has always been about reaching out to unexplored territory, making connections to new ideas or to new people. The collection of stories in the Learning Lab for Life is representative of our community. It represents the more than 50 languages spoken by our international student body. And in the FabLab, emerging technology is used to cross the digital divide and speak the language of the future in the dawn of the era of artificial intelligence. And as our founder, Mother Butler, said, the world never needed children's intelligence and sympathy more than it does today. Those words ring just as true today as they did 100 years ago. So in the years to come, no matter what platform young people use to read, regardless of how they develop their critical thinking skills, it is incumbent on educators to chart the path ahead. And these avenues give expression and voice to their heart and mind in natural or in artificial languages. And the singularity of the RSHM vision of international Catholic education is that this voice is not only to speak, but to be heard and really to reach out in fellowship to travelers along this road of our long and storied history. So to begin our program this evening, before we move to the official blessing and inaugural ceremony, it is with honor and great delight that I introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Chantel Prat. Dr. Prat is the forerunner in groundbreaking research in neuroscience. Her book, The Neuroscience of You, How Every Brain is Different and How to Understand Yours, is an engaging and accessible exploration of her research. I came upon Dr. Prat's work as a reader and fan first, and I followed her work closely. And it's not just because her book has a lot of laughs for a book about neuroscience. So much of her work is on the unique identities of our brains, and that resonated with me, particularly within the context of our school and our educational ministry that is expansive and inclusive and diverse. With the mission of that all may have life guiding us, the text of the Neuroscience of You came to life for me as I pictured the students of this, our centenary year, and those of the previous 99 years in their rich and beautiful diversity of nationality and religion and language and talent. Dr. Prat is a professor from the University of Washington with appointments in the departments of psychology, neuroscience, and linguistics, and at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, the Center for Neurotechnology, and the Institute for Neuroengineering. Her numerous accolades include a Pathway to Independence Award from the National Institute of Health, and her work has been supported by the National Office of Naval Research and the Keck Foundation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chantel Prat for her address, The Power of Communication.
Thank you so much. All right, I have a confession. I have no idea if I'm supposed to talk for 3 minutes or 30 minutes based on this new timeline, so someone may come and cane me off the stage, but I am so honored to be here, and I'm about to introduce myself to you, but I'd like to start with knowing a little bit about you. So could you raise your hand if you have a child or a grandchild or know a child that is currently attending Marymount Paris? Okay. So I got to work with the 3rd to 8th graders today, and I want to start by telling you that your kids are truly awesome. It's not just you. This is my objective scientific opinion. I feel like I'm a little subdued right now because I gave like 150 high fives today, and I was so pumped up by their energy, by their passion for learning. I just want to go to school here. I don't know, can I go to all the grades? Can I serve? This is truly an exceptional place to be, and your children just reminded me of why I am here, and it's my passion to learn about myself, to learn about others, and to connect. So thank you so much for the 3 to 30 minutes we're going to spend together. I hope you understand that the bar is really high, and that even though it is very important to laugh at my jokes, I'm not sure if you'll be as enthusiastic as the kids were today, but please know that I have been given a lot of high fives, and so if you have that inside of you, it's totally appropriate for later. Okay. So first let me show you my favorite human. This is my daughter Jasmine here, who I have been investigating her brain for 26 years. So if you think you're an annoying parent, like, you need to work really hard. And she's so gracious. She's also a scientist. She works on ocean safety and fishing policies globally at the National Oceanic Institute and Atmospheric something NOAA in the U.S. at Washington, D.C. She's going to hopefully this is online. Welcome, everyone who's joining from home. Hopefully she never finds this or I'm in big trouble. I studied acronyms for years when she started working there. Okay. So why did I choose to speak about communication? Sarah gave me a lovely introduction, and there were a lot of places that I belong and a lot of institutes and affiliations. But this is what I really care about. So you can kind of think about my expertise in neuroscience, in psychology, which is the study of humanness, right? Many people who study neuroscience study much simpler animals like a fruit fly or a zebrafish to try and figure out how brains actually work, because humans are so messy. But my interest is at this intersection between how humans work, how brains work, and linguistics, language. And really what lies at the heart here is human connection. It's our tools for connecting with one another. And I think that human connection is really the recipe for success. So I think that I could draw different Venn diagrams that have to do with my roles, the important roles that I play as a parent, as an educator, as a science communicator. I think that human connection, when I say human connection is central to our success, I don't mean how many zeros are in your income. I mean how well you sleep at night. And in fact, a recent study that was conducted on hundreds of thousands of people showed that not having close relationships is as related, it's more actually predictive of early mortality rates than smoking 2 packs a day or excessive drinking. So on the reverse, loneliness is a risk for health. So I really think that I'm very passionate about this opportunity to connect with you. For those of you who have children, it's so important to me as an individual and in all of these roles I play. Okay, and this is my husband. So cute. So I like to send this wish to everyone in the world that you find somebody who looks at you the way my husband looks at a menu. Because it's the best feeling in the world. Okay, so how am I going to tell you as a neuroscientist and a psychologist about that feeling, about how to connect? Well, fortunately, there are other people who do this for a living. I'm not even a social psychologist. And my colleague, Jonathan Cantor, came up with this really interesting model for interpersonal relationships for the recipe. So essentially, what you really need are 2 people who understand one another. In his model, you have a person who's in a trusting relationship is willing to disclose something to another person, and that person then takes in these signals and responds in a way that if it's good, that first person feels validated, heard, helped, understood. And note that all of these things are happening through our perceptual filters, through our motives, our needs, our fears, our goals. And so when I look at this is what I see. Person A has something going on in their brain. That's what matters to us when we want to express ourselves and feel seen. We have a series of tools. Language is one of them. It's not the only one for trying to communicate. Like, how about this? I'm fine. It's fine. So much can be said there, right? Everything is fine. So you know if you're in a relationship, that's a not fine. So when person B's brain receives that, there's some pattern of activation that's either close or far from interpreting. What you really want is to read behind the I'm fine, right? And then they behave. So then they can say like, oh, you're fine, great, and that will be bad. But if they behave in a way that makes that person feel that they are understood, they're actually both brains increase in their reward value. They get feel-good connection, which comes in oxytocin, dopamine. There are different neurochemicals that increase these bonds between people. But really what you need to do is figure out what's going on in that invisible mind using these observable clues to understand another. And that's what I want to talk about today. How do we reverse engineer another person's brain? How do we connect? What are our tools for communicating with someone? And how might that be really challenging if it's someone from a different place, a different developmental stage, a different personality type? How do we understand someone else? So our most instinctive way of understanding others is through mirroring. When our brain observes a behavior, it models what it would be doing if it were acting out that behavior. So when you look at this face on your right, on my left, which I think is Nicolas Cage, but I'm not sure. It's an actual test. I think it has to be. I don't know if he's consented to this, but, and you try and figure out which of the following emotions he's feeling based just on those eyes, your brain is actually simulating that. And as you might intuit, not everyone is equally good at reverse engineering these kind of clues. We have different capabilities in this area. And it develops. So this is why adorable little children will cover their eyes to make you disappear. Because they think that a small child, up until the age of 4 or 5, depending on how you test it, literally doesn't understand that you're not in a mind meld at all times. They don't understand even at a very young age that you're a different entity. Where they stop and you start, You're born in full connection. But this doesn't always work when your brain doesn't work like someone else. So if you find yourself in a situation where you think this person makes stably poor choices, or, oh my gosh, they're their own worst enemy. We are all our own worst enemy, trust me on that. And what happens is you're putting yourself in that person's shoes and you're thinking about what would make you make that decision. You're perceiving their action through your lens of previous experiences, values, et cetera, et cetera. So human connection and communication is so important to us that we can map the history of this school, and I want to map the history of this school and go a little bit farther back. Throughout this time, you can think about, and we can talk a little bit about major advances in human culture and how they've been centered on our ability to connect and communicate with one another. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit today. Oh, I already said this. Language is a tool. And I think it's really wonderful that the students in this school are exposed to multiple languages because obviously, and I am married to English as a third language speaker. Obviously, language is one of the most powerful behaviors we have to express and understand another. It's imperfect, but certainly the more languages one speaks, the more people they can connect with. Okay. So let's talk about my quick dive, and I'm also not a historian, not a social psychologist, not a historian. But you know, they say those who can't do teach, so this is fine. But there are a lot of things. So does anyone want to raise their hand and call out something that's happened in the last 100 years that's central to human communication? Internet, the cell phone. You guys got it. All right. Personal computing, so computers are older than this period of time, but the sort of general purpose computers and then personal computing really started taking off. I live in Seattle, so you'll have to forgive me for being techie here. But the 60s and 70s is when our technologies for connecting computers to one another started developing and for having these portable computers. And right around that time, I don't know, my stepdad had a cell phone in a suitcase, like a little bag that plugged into the car. Right around that time, the first mobile call was made in the city of New York, 1973. Now, I might be biased, but I don't think that was very long ago. Okay. And then in the next 20 years, we had smartphones, the World Wide Web, Wikipedia, and social media. I think most of us in this room, probably everybody in this room, remembers a time without social media. Some of us remember a time without internet. Some of us remember talking to our friends on the phone on a leash, right? So these things have fundamentally changed the way we connect with one another. And for anybody who reads my book or gets to know me, you'll know that I'm never going to say something is totally bad or totally good. It wouldn't exist and it wouldn't transform society if there weren't ways that this is helping us. But I'm going to talk about what are some of the advantages and what are some of the limitations. Okay. Oh, I totally forgot, but I put my stuff here. So 2013, I was part of the team that actually connected two human brains together, which makes me a really mad scientist because it was my husband and our friend Raj Rao in computer science. But I hooked their brains directly together so that they could play a game together using only signals from each other's brains across campus. And when we did that, we made history as the first human brain-to-brain connection. And as scary as that is, because we all feel like privacy is an issue and people are reading our minds and so forth and so on, cannot do this without consent. Trust me, you've got to hold really still and need someone to hit just the right spot. Imagine what might happen if you could directly translate what was going on inside of you to someone else. Would you choose that if you could? To sort of, not have to go through words or try and explain it. There are some things that we know that by virtue of how we know them are non-verbalizable. Imagine if you could just add to your cell phone text some kind of a skin response that tells you a little bit about whether you're bored or excited or nervous. Like, how might that change? Maybe it comes up as a color that goes with your text and just gives a little bit of idea about the context. Okay, I also put ChatGPT. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT. I thought it would be a mistake not to put that. Again, showing how creating something, basically, in my mind, having been around AI for a very long time, what makes ChatGPT revolutionary is that it talks to you like you, and it presents information like you would, which makes grading essays really hard as an instructor, because you don't know who wrote it, ChatGPT or your student. But it's going to speak to my idea here that when technology comes to meet us where we are, it can be very effective. All right, let's zoom out. So now we're 200 years, and there we had the invention of the telegraph and the telephone. Before these things, we couldn't talk to somebody who wasn't next to us, right? We couldn't interact. And of course, this is interacting on the telephone is live. On the telegraph, it's slow, but not quite as slow as like writing a letter and sending it through Paul Revere or whoever, right? But think about this. Let's zoom out 5,000 years. So, written language leaves a trace. And most anthropologists think that the earliest written language was about 3,400 BCE, so about 5,000 years ago. And what I want to tell you is when it comes to what our brains were designed for, even written language is new. So, and that brings us to this opening of this beautiful library and access to all of this information. So, nobody is born a good reader. Nobody. And unlike spoken language, if you raise your child in a crib full of newspapers, they will 1,000% guaranteed not learn to read. It is not an instinct. It takes thousands of hours of practice, and it takes rewiring the brain in a way that areas that were developed to do different things, expert visual pattern recognition. If you just think about it for a second or look at a different language, we're going from squiggly lines that are really similar to one another to these stories unfolding like a movie or a podcast, depending on how your brain works in the mind. It takes a lot of practice to kind of map from those squiggly lines to sounds to words and inferences. We embellish those words with things we know about the world and how it works. So this brain here shows some of the areas you have. I'm going to walk over. No, I can't. They're videoing me. At the back of the head, you see a bright area. That's the visual cortex. These are people. This is a person reading a sentence. In the middle area, you see language and memory. You're retrieving every experience. Every time you see a word, it's a history index. That's how ChatGPT got so smart without any knowledge. All it did was consume human language, and each of those words is a database. The kind of context that it co-occurs in shapes what you build in your brain when you see that word. It's an index of history and learning. And up front, you have motor areas. So again, you mirror. When you see a word, your brain is simulating how you would produce it. That's part of how you understand the word. And language is something we don't all do the same. That's how I got into this field. When I first scanned my daughter's little tiny brain, developing brain, I found out that her language was in the complete opposite hemisphere as everything any doctor who ever goes to med school will learn about where language is. And her brain told me that she was going to be a lefty before her hands did, which was really cool. Of course, I just thought I was doing it wrong because I was just starting neuroscience. I was like, how did I get these things flipped? But 26 years of experimentation, and I'm fairly sure it's the brain, not the scientist. So I want to show you what some of this variability looks like, because I can talk about diversity. And when I talk about diversity, I talk about the way each of our brains is unique. And this is just reading a single sentence on the screen. These are all typically developing monolingual English college students attending Carnegie Mellon. So a much more homogeneous group of people than is representative of the world or of the children who attend this school. This is what their brains look like when they read sentences. So what is unfortunate is that our theories are all based on a group average that looks like the first brain that I showed you. Our medicine, one of my first podcasts was with this neurologist, and he said to me, I read your book and I realized everything I learned in med school is wrong. And I was like, yes. How do you feel about that? Because I want you to know that before you operate on my brain or tell me what you think is going to happen next. So that's great. Like now, like go give this to your friends and we'll be good. Our theories about the relationship between the mind and brain are based on statistical averages that treat individual variability as noise, as measurement error. And since the beginning of my career, I've been arguing that our theories need not only to account for how group averages change in different contexts, but how two different individuals doing the same task go about it using different parts of the brain. Whatever you think that part of the brain does, you need to account for why it's doing it differently in different people. Okay. So going back to this idea that reading is still new for our brain, depending on the country you live in and the language you speak. So English is a really challenging language to learn to read in because it's not very transparent. Incidents of dyslexia are estimated of up to 20%. There's a lot of figuring that there are plenty of adults currently that were undiagnosed with dyslexia. So these estimates, and I looked this up from the Yale Dyslexia Center, are that 1 in 5 children experience developmental difficulties learning to read. And up to 90% of the children who have diagnosed learning challenges fall into this dyslexia category. So we take it for granted that your child will be able to learn through written material at a certain age, but just keep in mind that even learning to read is something that takes thousands of hours of practice for our brain, and not all brains do it equally well. What's cool about this is that, and I really recommend this book, if you or someone you know has a dyslexia diagnosis, The Dyslexic Advantage. The adaptation in our brain that makes it easier for some of us to learn to read than others is a shrinking right hemisphere. So when the two halves of our brain have different capabilities, they get assigned different jobs kind of systematically. And it's this specialization of function across the hemispheres that makes something as sort of abstract as learning to map a shape to a sound, to a word, to a meaning, easier for some kids than others. But kids who have the intact right hemisphere, their job assignment gets a little bit more distributed. And there are things that children with dyslexia, on average, of course, dyslexia looks different in different children, excel at. Things that require big picture, system level engineering are things that happen on average in the right hemisphere. So this is just an idea of how sometimes we think this is the way to be, or this is good, or this is skilled learning, but it's actually a shrinking of part of the brain that allows us to have easy time learning to read. And so these children who suffer from dyslexia or who are diagnosed with dyslexia don't need to suffer. Have some advantages in the way that they can understand the world. This is Edie, isn't she cute? This is how all of our brains learn best. So when you think about what kind of a learner you are, you might think, I'm visual, I'm verbal, I'm tactile. We're all experiential learners. When you think about learning, you think about the things that happen in the classroom or in a stage like this, where I'm standing here and I'm speaking to you, and I can instruct with language your brain. I can reprogram your brain with my words. But this is such a tiny bit of the learning that we do. All of us learn largely like all behaving animals from trial and error, from social modeling. We learn from looking at the people around us. We learn from trying and making mistakes. We learn from rich social cues. And so just keep that in mind, that this is one of the innate, common ways that children learn. And we're asking them to learn like this. So this is not bad. This is great, because imagine who got to come to school when it was a one-to-one model. School was not accessible. We've broken some of the barriers to access to information. So access to information is a good thing. We have plenty of it, and it's really exciting, but it's also different from how our brains evolved to learn. There's no social component here, and that makes it really hard to motivate yourself. Okay, So in our lab, I'm just going to show you 2 slides of data and then let you go see the books. In our lab, I started out focusing on reading and language learning, and we've really been focusing on programming because programming, I believe, will be the literacy of the future. So about 60 to 75% of the jobs listed online in the US add coding as a desirable skill. It has gone from being a niche skill that computer engineers and computer scientists learn to something that is essential for all STEM fields and in many different jobs in the marketplace. As this technology advances, so does our need to speak to computers advance. And what we've been showing in our lab is that what it takes to be good at programming is not really aligned with our stereotypes of the sort of I can say this because I'm married to a computer scientist, as the sort of antisocial engineering types that are good at math. Many computer programming courses require linear algebra or other advanced mathematics because it started in an engineering environment. And I still get people to this day that are saying, no, everyone who's good at math is good at coding, and language is like only for if you're doing Fortran or something. And they're wrong. The science doesn't suggest that. The culture, you might see a bunch of mathy engineers in the computer science, but that's because culture told them this is what coding looks like. In fact, over the last, over the history of this school, computer programming languages have come to look like natural languages. So we've moved from punch cards to a language. I don't know how many people in this room know how to code, but on the bottom you have something called Python, which is the fastest growing language, and it's always in the top 3 over the last decade that we've been working on it. And even if you don't know how to code, you look at that and you think, I'm pretty sure I kind of know what that does, right? Because it's capitalizing on the English language. So I think that the literacy of the future are going to be children and adults who can speak to computers. And what I want to show you really quickly here is our research that's looked at what predicts learning coding languages. And what I really want to call your attention to is the parts of the bars that are in pinkish, which is language aptitude. These are different outcomes. You don't need to know what they are. It's fine. It's irrelevant detail. Versus bluish. So over on this bar on your right is the average predictive utility of general cognitive abilities in red, language in pink, brain stuff, which we don't need to talk about, in beige. And then that little tiny line is numeracy. So what do? So we also recorded brainwaves for people reading lines of code like this. For animals and pets, print animal. This is a line of code that will take something like a list and print each item in the list. What we showed is that proficient coders read this just like reading a text and build a model, a mental model of what's going on in the code, what the code is for. So we recorded electrical activity from the scalp when people of different levels of proficiency with code read lines of code like this, 1 word at a time. This is what it looks like if you do it for language. The cats won't eat the food. Over here on your left, you see what happens if you mess with the meaning. So if I said the cats won't bake the food, you think, well, cats don't bake, that's weird, and your brain gives you this negative response. If I say the cats won't eating the food, your brains go, whoa, that's weird, but it gives you a slower and positive response. And if you say the cats won't baking the food, which is wrong in both ways, you get both responses. What we just submitted, the science is just fresh, hot off the press, is research showing that the exact same responses at the same time in the same areas of the brain happen when you read code. So if we say for fruit in pets instead of for animal in pets, that's a variable name. It could say for X in pets. It could say anything. It's a variable, so it doesn't make the code incorrect. But if it's not meaningful, your brain goes, whoa, that's weird, and gives you that N400 response. If we put this is the thing that blows my mind. If we put quotations around animal, which makes it incorrect, that's not a good structure for the code. It says, well, that's weird, and gives you this late P600, just like if you had a grammatical violation. Your brain is using quotations to understand what the job of that item of the text is, just like it understands what the job of a verb in a sentence is. And if we do both things, we get both kinds of errors. So coding is really the literacy of the future. Oh, this is my long version. It's okay. What I want you to know from this is learning to code looks exactly like learning a second natural language. Early natural language learners process everything in that early, whoa, that's weird. Even if it's grammar, you get this N400. And so you can see native speakers on the end, this is just grammatical errors, have P600s, but they start out, whoa, that's weird, in the early way. Our coders do the same thing. The novice coders process every kind of mistake in this early N400 negative phase. And as they become more proficient with code, they understand the difference between form and meaning. I hope that this will change the culture around coding as one that is learning to talk with your computer. Coding languages are coming to mimic human languages, and I think it should change what the classrooms look like. Looks like the classroom on the right here looks a lot like a language learning classroom. They're engaging in some kind of project, and they're immersed in it. Sandbox. So what I really want you to know is that the communication and connection is central to human success, and our technologies have shaped the human history. And it can enhance our ability to connect. It can enhance access to information. But these ways of connecting can also outpace what our brains were built to do. And I just want you to remember that no matter what tools you have, at the end of the day, connection requires being able to reverse engineer another mind. And I think that's the hardest thing that humans do. So I want to end with a quote from my book that says, trying to walk a mile in another person's shoes is bound to give you blisters if they aren't the right size. Instead, I hope you'll join me on an adventure and try walking a mile in their brains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prat. It was wonderful, and the crowd this evening was almost as raucous as the crowd we had this afternoon with the grades 3 to 8. Thank you very much. So our dear guests, we'll now invite you to please make your way outside and to the right, where we will have our official inauguration and blessing. Thank you.